You've done it before. Bitten into a piece of overripe fruit, a mango sitting on the counter one day too long. A handful of grapes that had gone soft and strange, and felt something. A faint warmth. A slight buzz you couldn't quite explain. You probably thought nothing of it, but that feeling is older than human civilization, older than farming, older than fire. It might be the oldest feeling in the entire primate family tree. Here's what most people get wrong about alcohol. They treat it like an invention. Like some clever ancient decided to collect grain, let it rot in water. Figured out what happened and built a tradition around it. A human discovery, a cultural artifact. But alcohol was never invented. It was found, because fermentation doesn't wait for permission. Anywhere sugar exists, fruit, honey, grain, wild yeast is already there, already converting it into ethanol. It has been doing this for hundreds of millions of years, long before the first human stood upright, long before the first primate reached for a branch. And this is where the story gets strange. About 10 million years ago, our ancestors developed a genetic mutation in an enzyme called ADH4. This mutation made them roughly 40 times more efficient at metabolizing ethanol than any primate that came before. Scientists discovered this by reconstructing ancient proteins from extinct species, testing how well they processed alcohol. The difference was enormous. That mutation didn't appear by accident, it appeared because it was useful. The ancestors who could eat fermented fruit without dying, without seizing, without shutting down, got more calories. More calories meant more energy. More energy meant more offspring. The ones who couldn't handle it didn't leave nearly as many descendants. You inherited that mutation. Every human alive today did. Which means your body was designed, not metaphorically, but through millions of years of actual natural selection to process alcohol. To detect it in food, to extract energy from it. The machinery is built in, but there's something even stranger underneath all of this. Because that genetic adaptation happened around the same time our primate ancestors were transitioning from the forest canopy to the ground. Fallen fruit is overripe fruit, and overripe fruit ferments. The primates who could safely eat whatever was rotting on the forest floor had an edge that compounded across 10 million years. You were never taught to tolerate alcohol. You were born tolerating it. The question was never whether humans would learn to drink. The question was only a matter of time until one of them decided to do it on purpose. Nobody knows their name. They lived somewhere between the Fertile Crescent and the Eastern Mediterranean. Roughly 13,000 years ago, they were not farmers. Agriculture hadn't been invented yet. They hunted, they gathered, they moved. At some point, one of them left grain sitting in a stone container, with a little water, walked away, and came back to something that had never existed before. We know this because of a cave in northern Israel called Rakafet. In 2013, archaeologists excavating that cave found stone mortars carved directly into the rock floor. The mortars were old, 13,000 years old, from a culture called the Natufians. Researchers found residue inside them, plant matter, starch, traces of fermentation, the chemical signature of intentional brewing. These people were making something to drink, storing it, returning to it. And they were doing all of this before anyone on Earth had planted a single seed. That detail matters more than it first appears. For over a century, the dominant theory of early civilization went roughly like this. Humans discovered agriculture. Agriculture produced surplus grain. Surplus grain eventually fermented by accident. That accident became alcohol. A clean logical sequence. Alcohol is a footnote to farming. Rakafet flipped that sequence entirely. Because if the Natufians were brewing before they were farming, then the relationship between grain and alcohol runs the other way. Some researchers now argue that the desire for fermented drink was one of the reasons humans started cultivating grain. Not bread, beer. The need to produce enough raw material to keep brewing at scale may have been one of the forces that pulled nomadic people toward permanent settlements. The most striking evidence for this sits in southern Turkey. At a site called Göbekli Tepe, Göbekli Tepe is the oldest known monumental structure on Earth. Massive carved stone pillars arranged in circles, built 11,500 years ago, by people who had no metal tools, no wheels, and no agriculture. Coordinating that construction required feeding hundreds of workers over years. Archaeologists found on site enormous limestone vessels, some holding over 150 liters, with chemical residue consistent with fermented grain. The oldest temple ever built may have been organized around communal drinking, which raises a question nobody fully answers. Did humans build civilization so they could have shelter, safety, and food? Or did they build it so they could keep doing what someone in a cave in Israel had started doing 13,000 years ago? Here's the part nobody wants to say out loud. Every serious conversation about alcohol eventually arrives at the same place. The warnings, the statistics, The careful language about dependency and liver damage and years taken off a life. All of it true, all of it real. But there is another story running underneath that one, and it is just as well documented and almost nobody talks about it. Alcohol may have been one of the primary engines of human social evolution. Not despite what it does to the brain, because of it. Here's what ethanol actually does when it enters your system. It suppresses the amygdala, the part of your brain that generates threat responses. Fear, the instinct to treat an unfamiliar face as a potential danger. For most of human prehistory, that instinct kept people alive. Strangers were threats. Unknown tribes meant competition for resources, territory, food. The default neurological response to an unfamiliar human was something close to suspicion. Alcohol temporarily dismantles that response. And in a world where cooperation between unrelated groups was becoming increasingly valuable, for trade, for defense, for sharing information across territories, the ability to chemically lower that barrier had real strategic value. Shared drinking was not just a social ritual, it was a trust mechanism. A way of signaling, I will lower my defenses if you lower yours. Anthropologists studying contemporary hunter-gatherer societies have documented this pattern across dozens of unrelated cultures on multiple continents. Communal drinking consistently appears at the moments that require the highest levels of intergroup trust. Alliance negotiations, trade agreements, conflict resolutions. The shared cup is older than diplomacy. In many ways, it is diplomacy. But there is a second function that almost never gets mentioned. In the earliest permanent settlements, the proto-cities of Mesopotamia, the river communities of ancient China, the early urban centers of the Indus Valley, clean water was a death sentence. Waterborne pathogens killed children before they reached 5. Killed adults weakened by other illness. Killed entire communities during flood seasons when waste and water mixed. Weak fermented beverages were safer. The alcohol and acidity that develop during fermentation kill a significant portion of the bacteria that make water lethal. The people who drank beer and fermented grains survived at higher rates than the people who drank from the river. For thousands of years across multiple independent civilizations, the people who drank alcohol outlived the people who didn't. Your ancestors didn't drink despite the risks. They survived because of it. Think about the last time you had a drink with someone. Maybe it was at a bar after work. Maybe it was a glass of wine at dinner, a beer at a game. A bottle opened at a party where you didn't know half the people in the room, but felt after an hour like you did. Think about the specific feeling of that first sip settling in. The slight loosening. The way the edges of a conversation soften and something more honest starts coming through. That feeling is 13,000 years old at minimum, probably much older. The person who brewed in that cave at Rockfed felt it. The workers who built Göbekli Tepe felt it. Drinking from those 150-liter limestone vessels after hauling carved stone across miles of open terrain. The Natufians felt it sitting around whatever fire they kept burning. While the fermented grain did what fermented grain does, the same warmth, the same loosening, the same thing you felt last Friday. Here's what makes that strange to sit with. 10,000 years is nothing in evolutionary terms. Your brain is not meaningfully different from the brain of a person who lived before agriculture existed. The same dopamine pathways, the same GABA receptors that ethanol binds to, slowing the nervous system, producing that specific quality of calm that no other molecule quite replicates. The same reward signal firing in the same structures, telling you that something good just happened, that you are safe, that the people around you are not a threat. Your brain cannot tell the difference between a limestone vessel in a Neolithic cave and a glass in your hand right now. It is running the same program it has always run. What changed is everything around that program. The context, the frequency, the concentration of what we drink. The fact that the signal is now available every day instead of at rare moments of communal ritual. After weeks of hunting and building and surviving, the ancient machinery is still there, working exactly as designed. We just put it in a world it was never built for. There is something worth holding on to in that. Not as an excuse. Not as a justification for anything, but as a fact about what you are and where you come from. Every person who has raised something to their lips and felt that specific shift in the quality of an evening, for 13,000 documented years, probably longer, felt exactly what you feel. You are not the first person to do this, you are just the latest.